Hello, everyone. So, welcome back to this running podcast. So, I'm very excited about today's topic because, of course, it's going to be a running talk, but it's going to be kind of like a basics, kind of like a 101 introduction to what a good training plan should consist of. I know all of us, we sometimes decide to go and start training for our first half marathon or marathon, and we see so many plans out there and we feel a little bit insecure about pretty much what a training plan choose for us or which one is correct for us, which is like our best fit for us. We also see a lot of coaches out there, which I think all of them are like wonderful. But I also think it's very important to have someone that meets that we have that a good chemistry or connection with also, like, so they can help us understand all the different aspects of a good training plan and also be able to answer all of the questions that we have as we train and get prepared for that long distance event. So to help us with that today, I have like a wonderful guest. I have heard like wonderful things about her as a running coach. I love her Instagram page. I'm always like, yes, yes, I agree completely. I love your post. I love your mentality and the everything that you share on your reels. And I'm like, yes, I completely agree with everything that you share. So I'm very excited to talk to you about this 101 of a training plan, a good training plan. But let me give you the introduction about my guest today. So Alyssa Ford is a doctor of physical therapy. She's a running coach and a strength coach who specializes in working with runners. She is passionate about helping runners overcome injuries and tackle performance goals with confidence so they can enjoy a healthy, strong, consistent training plan and racing. She believes in science-based approach, which obviously, yes, please, I completely agree with that, and loves helping runners remove the guesswork with an individualized plan and a coach athlete relationship that is built on collaboration, support, and trust. So, thank you, Lisa, for joining me today. Welcome. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for such a wonderful introduction. I'm really excited to be here and to have this conversation with you. I really appreciate you inviting me on as a guest.
No, thank you so much, for coming with me. Like I'm saying, like I love your Instagram page, like I guess your philosophy and everything that you share. And I have heard wonderful things about you, obviously, as a coach. So I was very excited to talk to you, like to understand a training plan from your perspective. You're a physical therapist, and I really think that physical therapists are the best coaches. I'm a little bit biased by that. I feel like you guys have uh, have that understanding of the physiology of of the muscles, of the movement, how to prevent injuries, how to train smart. So I'm a little bit biased by PTs, like, to be honest.
I love it. I love it. And thank you so much for saying that. And I totally agree. I think having a PT background really helps me be a better coach. And I think a lot of times athletes like having somebody who has a medical background in their corner, whether they're injured or not, just if they have questions or if they're worried about an injury popping up, just having somebody who kind of knows what they're talking about when it comes to injuries supporting them can be really helpful for athletes as well.
Yeah, and I think it is also like I was telling Dr. Lowe the last time that I have her, you guys just know these tricks. It's just like a matter of knowing something like really, really like a small detail that you just are able to work on it, and that's it. Like the magic appears to prevent an injury or just to get rid of it. So, but of course, so I'm excited to talk to you about that. So, Alisa, can you tell us a little bit about your running experience? How did you get into, I guess, running as a coach, working with runners? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so my running journey started when I was pretty young, probably around middle school age. And I started running because my mom is actually a runner and a marathoner. So it was something that we would do together, a way for us to spend time together, a way that I got to do something that she also loved doing. So it was really great. So that kind of sparked my love for running pretty young. But for a long time, running was very much so something that I kind of did on the side. I loved it. I enjoyed it. I did it regularly, but I never trained formally for anything. I would just a couple times a week, lace up my shoes and get out the door for a couple miles. And it was something I really loved. But I didn't really turn to distance running until after college. So I played sports competitively through high school and college. So
What did
after
you play?
I did Taekwondo,
Oh,
actually.
nice. So something completely different.
I know, complete pivot from from what I used to do. But it was a huge part of my life, and I was used to, training like an athlete and having this kind of structured training. So after I graduated college and stepped away from doing Taekwondo competitively, I missed feeling like an athlete and having something to train for. So I decided to do something out of my comfort zone, to sign up for something that was, new and challenging. So I decided to train for my first half marathon. And at this point, and this is part of the reason why I love that this is the topic that we're covering today. At that point, I had no idea what I was doing. And I made probably every single mistake that you could possibly make in the books. I learned a lot of
But
things.
don't we all? I think
Yes.
we all do. Like I have a background in medicine. I do like research and different things. But you ask me about running, I have no idea. Like what is that? It's completely this world, and it's so much information. And like you, I had no idea what was going on. And I began like really late, like I guess in my early 40s.
Yes.
So I think we all go through that experience that we think that running is just running, which technically is running, right? And just go a little bit faster and a little bit farther away. And technically that's how it should be. But then
Right.
you realize you start developing these injuries and something is going wrong. And then you start to discover that there's so much information out there like to figure out, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times, like, there is that learning curve. And I feel like a lot of runners make the same mistakes kind of at the beginning of their training cycle or the beginning of their running journey. So that was
Some
kind of sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so that after going through that experience myself and realizing, wow, I could have done that a lot better than what I just did, that's kind of what sparked my interest in trying to learn everything that I possibly could about running and training. So just really started kind of deep diving and learning everything that I could and, applying it to myself. And the better that I got, the more I kind of fell in love with the whole distance side of running. So that was kind of my my running journey. And then I continued running and racing as I went back to PT school. So that's where I learned kind of a lot more in depth about, exercise physiology and injuries and how to rehab different injuries. And I continued running and racing throughout that time. And had the opportunity in PT school. I knew that I wanted to work with athletes. So I had the opportunity on my clinical rotations to work with athletes and to get that experience of working with runners on the rehab side of things. So when I graduated PT school, I already kind of had this idea in the back of my mind that I knew I wanted to work with runners, and it was just a matter of kind of figuring out what exactly that looked like.
But I think that's really cool, for example, that you get to experience that training for a long distance event, everything that it takes or entails for a
Yeah.
good training, everything that could go wrong as well, and then kind of like go back and finish PT school because you already have that experience and you already know as you're like in college, you already know what to focus on. So it's kind of like a hands-on application of your college and of your education because you already know what you're looking for, what to pay attention to. So I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And when did the coaching begin? Because you went into PT, and when did you decide to start coaching runners?
Yeah, so I didn't start coaching until after PT school. So I was working full time as a PT in a clinic. I was still running and training and racing myself. And I just got really involved in my local running community. And I first got my coaching certification just because I wanted to learn more about running. I wasn't really sure if I was going to use it or not, because I was working full time and I was like, I don't know if I'll have time to start coaching on top of that. But it was just something that I was really interested in. So I got my coaching certification. And then the more I got involved in the local running community, the more I kind of heard a lot of common experiences from runners kind of struggling with the same things, especially when it came to managing injuries. And I talked to a lot of runners who had these kind of negative experiences in healthcare with managing injuries. And it just kind of sparked something in me that made me realize, there's this problem and I feel like I can help solve it. So that was really kind of the kick in the butt that I needed to take that leap and start my own coaching business.
And I see that too. And this is where think we feel like very passionate about running, because the more you learn about it, you see new runners. We all go through the same experience, having these negative experiences, getting injured, maybe go and get some medical help, or and then maybe you need to rest, or you need to give up running, or maybe you need to look for a different activity, right? According to your age, or running is bad for knees, or running this.
Oh,
So sometimes I feel like these new runners, which I mostly see in new runners, but they're even afraid to go and get like these healthcare um, services, because they know they're gonna put them to rest, and it can have like a very negative impact on us when they tell us, go get rest, you cannot be doing that, stop it, or that's it. And and obviously we don't want to hear that, right? We want to be able to find an alternative. Well, what can I do to get well, to so I can continue doing it? And I do feel like a lot of health experts, sometimes we are not prepared to really guide um, runners, um, to continue doing this and have like a positive experience, and support it, because like I was saying, for many, it provides like a very strong emotional support and mental health and all of that. It's more than just running, right?
yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree. I think that a lot of times when runners have an injury pop up, they're scared about seeking help for it because they're worried that whoever they go to is going to tell them that they need to stop running. So they'd rather just kind of push through it and try to figure it out on their own because they love running and want to be able to continue running, which is absolutely understandable. But a lot of times it can make uh, an injury a lot worse because they continued to run through it, or didn't seek that medical help, and it's coming from that place of fear of not wanting to be told that they can't run.
Yeah, exactly. So, Alisa, I think it's very important for us to understand what is a good training plan and what it should consist of. I think there are many great training plans that you see out there and you can download, and they're all perfect, right? I mean, pretty much all of them, they're going to have like the same components of increasing mileage and maybe having some speed works here and there as you get closer to the race and all of that. So, I think it would be good for us to approach what are like the basics of a good training plan should consist of. What should I be able to find, I guess, in that training plan? What do you think a good training plan should consist of, like a basic one?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have to say it depends a little bit on the distance that you're training for. And also, there's a lot of different factors that can come into play. So an athlete, what their individual goals are with that race that they're training for, what their racing history is, how much experience do they have? Are they newer to running? Are they newer to these distance? All of those things that kind of come into play. To designing a training plan that's kind of custom to that athlete and what they're hoping to achieve. So, but there are definitely some kind of general ideas that I think will apply to a good training plan. And again, this is a little bit distance specific, but assuming that we're talking more about half marathons and marathons, those kind of longer distance races, I think the main one component that's important is just gradually building mileage, right? So training for enough time that you have time to gradually increase that mileage to the point where you're confident tackling that distance on race day. So that gradual increase, I think, is really a key component. Something else that I think is really important is factoring in time for recovery. So incorporating down weeks. So building mileage consistently for a few weeks in a row, followed by a down week or a recovery week to let your body reset and recover. And also just making sure that you have rest days as part of your plan, right? If you're training your body to adapt to something new and train for this new distance, recovery is really key for being confident tackling that distance. So I think
Yeah.
those are really kind of the two main components is a gradual increase up to the distance that you're hoping to cover, and just making sure to factor in that rest and recovery as well.
Okay, and for the I guess for the base building process, because I
Yeah.
see that most of the plans that you see out there, I know like for more experienced runners, we can talk about maybe like a 12-week a program, about 12 weeks, right? And then 16, and we see that usually they mention like coach to marathon, like 20 weeks, right? Would be kind of like ideal. Um, is it advisable if I'm like those training plans from coach to marathon at 20 week? Is that a good training plan, a 20-week plan?
Yeah, great question. And I think so. If it's somebody's first time running a marathon and they're kind of building from a very low volume place or not from running a lot, I think it's helpful to plan for more time than that. So I really recommend if it's somebody's first time racing for a marathon, kind of regardless of what their starting point is, to plan for 6 months to prepare for that race. So that kind of includes a couple months of base building before really getting into that more race specific training. I think a lot of times runners who are newer to training for a distance event don't give themselves enough time and don't really factor in that there should be a little bit of wiggle room in your plan too, right? Because life happens sometimes. You might get sick, your kids get sick, things get crazy at work, you have to travel, whatever happens. It's very rare that a training plan will go completely smoothly the entire time. So I think having some wiggle room in there can be really beneficial. So
And a
I would,
training plan can be look kind of like a full-time job. It requires so much dedication or discipline to or commitment, I guess, to really put yourself into a training plan because from the running, from the recovery, from the sleeping, from what you eat, from taking, I guess, naps if you can, right? Doing strength training. It requires like so much really input to have like a solid and have like a good progress throughout the training plan.
yeah, no, I completely agree. There's a lot that goes into it. And that's a conversation that I'll have with athletes too when they're talking about trying a new distance or training for their first marathon is just talking about, do you have the time and space in your life to commit to something like this? Because it's a big commitment, and not every season of life is conducive to training for a marathon. It's a very time consuming thing. So I think just having that expectation and making sure that an athlete knows kind of what they're signing up for ahead of time can be helpful before starting that process too.
So maybe that should be kind of like the point number one, no? Like have that commitment, like really understand like everything that is going to apply for you to commit for that training plan, I guess, before actually beginning to train, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's step number one
That
for
will be
sure.
STEM. Are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this? How sure are you? On a scale from 1 to 10, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and that I think an interesting thing is too. As much as I love social media, and I think it's great in a lot of ways, there is just so much information out there. And if you're a runner on social media, it can feel like this pressure almost, right? It can feel like everybody that you follow is running a marathon. So sometimes that can be, someone will feel like, oh well, maybe I should run a marathon just because everybody else is doing it. And that's not a good reason to put yourself through the months and months of training to train for a rigorous event like that. So I think having those conversations, kind of early on in the training process is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And I talking about social media, I think for me, one of also, I guess, the pressures that you see, it's about your pace. I feel like we have all these Strava runners, right? Uh like I feel like every run they're trying to do is like to impress on Strava, right? Like PR every single run, PR again, PR again. Like, dude, slow down. Please, you're gonna get injured. but um but I feel like most of the pressure comes from speed. When we're kind of like trying to advocate for easy running and the importance of easy running and keeping it easy, and actually the magic that it does to ourselves to actually be able to maintain that easy pace on most of our runs, right? So, can you explain to our listeners why is easy running so important and not feel so much pressure or affected by uh, bringing up those numbers up with speed?
Yeah, no, I love this question because I think that's definitely an area that I struggled with at the beginning of my running journey. Before I knew any better, I thought that, in order to get faster, I needed to run fast on every single run. And that was not sustainable. So I kind of, learned that the hard way. But I think a lot of runners, especially newer runners, kind of fall into that trap. And like you said, there is a lot of pressure on social media. If you see people posting these certain paces and, it feels like, oh, well, I should be able to do that too. But easy running is a hard thing to learn, but it's such an important part of our training and such an invaluable skill to really master. And the reason behind it is in order to get good at running or to improve at running, you need to run a lot, right? So, really getting good at easy running and having that easy running be a majority of your training that you're doing allows you to train more and increase that volume in a way that's still recoverable. Um, and easy running serves a very specific purpose. It the inputs that it's giving our muscles and our body is different than running at a faster paces. So the adaptations that are happening are different. So without getting too much into the science and all of that behind it, the important thing or the purpose of easy running is to build the machinery that allows us to run more efficiently. So it allows us to use oxygen more efficiently so that we can eventually become more efficient runners. So what that means, what an efficient runner means is being able to run longer for faster before you get fatigued, right? And that's pretty much distance running in a nutshell. So easy running is really the foundation to getting better and faster as a runner.
Okay, so obviously easy running equals to developing your aerobic capacity, your aerobic
Yes.
fitness. It's gonna get better, your engine, right? It's gonna get better in your body so it can sustain for longer periods of time before starting to work on your speed. But you gotta have like a good engine and a good system to support you through those long distance um, training plans or training days, right? So when we're
Exactly.
talking about easy, I think there's a lot of uh, information that I see about easy running out there. And the more you read, the more questions that you have about easy running, right? But I guess at physiological level. But when we're talking about easy running, right? How should easy running feel? I know some people say like conversational plays, but you can still having like a conversation and feeling like out of breath. So, how should actually like a good easy running feel? Should we go by feel or should we go by heart rate? What's ideal to bring us the most benefit to our bodies?
Yes, great question. And I think it's, it's a skill and it can take some time to really get a true sense of what that easy effort feels like for you. I don't love heart rate as being our primary data point for guiding our paces or our effort for runs, for a few different reasons. The first reason being that a lot of runners get their heart rate data from a wrist device and they just aren't that accurate. So you don't want to base your training around data that isn't super accurate. If you're using a chest strap, it's a little bit different. But another reason why I don't love using heart rate, and again, heart rate is a great data point, but I just don't like using it as the only guide or the only data point for guiding our efforts. But there's a lot of different factors that can influence your heart rate on a given day, right? So, sleep and nutrition and stress, and if it's hot and humid out, all of those things are going to play a factor in what your heart rate is going to do on a given day. So I like using effort more as kind of the primary guide for tapping into that easy effort. And I like that, that conversational pace idea of, this is an effort where you should, if you're running with a friend, you should be able to chat the whole time without feeling like you're gasping for air, without feeling like you're huffing and puffing. So being able to hold a conversation with full sentences without feeling short of breath, that is your true conversational pace. If you're not running with a friend, you can try talking to yourself, but you might get some weird looks for doing that. But if, and that's something that I'll hear from athletes sometimes too, is like, well, I run by myself. How can I tell if I'm running a conversational pace? So some other kind of things to pay attention to are your breathing, right? Are you breathing comfortably? Or do you feel like you're getting to that point where you're huffing and puffing? If you feel like you're working that hard and your breathing is starting to get more labored, that means you're running too fast, and to slow it down. I think it's also helpful, and another kind of guide that I'll talk to my athletes about is using RPE, or rate of perceived exertion. So this kind of effort scale that starts at 1, which is, if you're just going out for a casual stroll around the block, that's a 1. And then a 10 would be like your maximal effort all out sprint. So it's kind of a range of efforts. And your easy pace effort should fall around like a 3 or a 4 on that scale. So it really, different people respond better to different types of cues and different feedback. So I think it's helpful to have kind of multiple sources and guides for what easy effort should feel like, and kind of providing them all for athletes, and then letting them kind of figure out what works best for them based on those different options.
Okay, and for when we're talking about easy running, is that strictly zone 2? And we can talk a little bit about the different zones that we have. Is that just zone 2, or does that also implies zone 3 and also zone 3?
Yeah, so zone 2, I feel like zone 2 training has recently just become this like hot topic.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I see zone
Right?
through, no, stick to zone 3, and then I see others, no, your aerobic capacity stay to zone 3, and then I see other people coming back and forth. So I think the more I listen to it about it, like I get more confused instead of
Right.
like clearing like the information for myself. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, let's have like a discussion where we all can agree on what is really like an easy effort on according to zone.
Yeah, yeah. So I love that you brought this up again, because it is a hot topic, and I feel like there is a lot of confusion around it, and you just see it everywhere, right? And I want to say that there is a little bit of nuance to it. It's not something that's necessarily always super straightforward, right? But when you're aiming for, if you're using heart rate based training and using zones to kind of guide your training efforts, then true easy running is zone 2, zone 1 or 2. If somebody is new to running and starting kind of from scratch, it's going to be really, really hard for them to stay in zone 2. So I think for somebody who's a newer runner, who's newer to the sport, who's just getting into it, they should not even think about zone 2. That should not be something on their radar, and a more effort-based approach is the best fit for them.
And I'm so glad
because
that you bring this up because I
yeah,
do see a lot of new runners. And obviously, we're always talking about easy running, right? And they always send me messages or anything. But my heart rate is in 150, 160. And
mm,
I'm barely like running. I'm barely like almost walking.
yeah.
So, like, how to approach like those clients that you have that barely beginning and they get stressed with their heart rates going like out too fast, but they're barely beginning. So I think zone two, like honestly, it requires like so much training to actually develop it like properly, and it takes time to develop that zone two. I guess it takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And like you were saying, with with runners, with athletes that are newer to the sport and are just starting to build up that aerobic base and that aerobic capacity, for them to truly be in zone two, it might be walking for a while, or it might be walk run intervals. Like that's a really good place to start. So I think just having those conversations early on and letting them know that these adaptations take time. And yeah, I won't really have them pay attention, excuse me, pay attention to heart rate as a data point that early on, and really just kind of using effort as a guide until they've been training more consistently for a few months and kind of get a better sense of it and have time to build those adaptations. Something else that I don't necessarily love about heart rate training is that I feel like a lot of times it can kind of take away from the enjoyment of going out for a run, right? Like you're so focused on, I need to stay in this specific range, and you're checking your watch every 5 seconds, that it like really kind of sucks the enjoyment out of the experience of just going out for a run. So that's another reason why it can be a helpful data point and a helpful guide, but I think really just tuning into your effort is really kind of the best way to tap into that easy zone, easy pace running. And heart rate or anything else can be helpful, helpful additional information, but shouldn't be the primary source of what's guiding your runs.
Is it still recommended for them to bring like walk breaks, kind of like to be incorporated and still get better at it, or just until you develop it with time?
Yeah, I love walking breaks. I take
Yeah.
walking breaks
Okay.
in my runs all the time. Like I don't think.
Lately, I do. I'm like, you know what? I don't care. I'm just gonna walk a little bit, whatever.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. You're still covering the same distance. And like when it comes to easy running, like pace does not matter whatsoever, right? Like our bodies don't know what pace is. They only know what stress is or what effort is. So, and it can kind of depend too on, if somebody, if it's really hot, like you're training through the summer, I walk in my runs a lot more frequently than I do now that the the cooler fall weather has rolled in. So it's really just like doing what you need to do to stay in that effort level, whatever that looks like on a given day. And that's where it kind of ties into those other factors coming into play too, right? So like on a day when if you've had a really stressful week and you haven't been sleeping well, then your pace is probably going to be significantly slower than on a week where you've had minimal stress and you've been sleeping great. So kind of taking those factors into consideration also, and just being able to adjust based on how you're feeling on a given day, instead of just being like, oh, I have to hit the specific number, and whatever these parameters that we come up with for ourselves that really don't mean anything.
yeah, definitely. And I'm so glad that you bring up weather because during the hot days, I understand we have to like adjust our pace. To be honestly, I don't even like paying attention to my pace. I just go by feel and however feels right, feels comfortable. But I think it takes time to get to that point because in the beginning you want to stick to your pace, or you're more focused on pacing. Oh, I cannot rest, or it's not
Mhm.
gonna count. I don't know. I feel like you feel people is watching you, but later on, I don't know. If, like with time, you're like, you know what? I don't care. I'm just gonna go ahead and whatever feels right. Right. But okay. I guess going back a little bit into the zones. Um, And also like zone 3, when well, I guess we're talking about zone 2, right? And easy zone, easy running. But zone 3, that's more like aerobic, right? And I know, understand that like your muscles are based more also on using also like glucose. They require more glucose, more energy. They're getting into that area there where they require more fuel to sustain that zone. Uh, it's I was listening to the other day to a podcast, and they were talking about zone 3 was more advisable when you're getting closer or you're working towards your marathon, as you're getting closer. But we are also here talking about the importance of easy running. So
Mhm.
about the zone 3, so this is where I get confused, like honestly,
Yeah.
with the zones and the information out there, right? So we're talking about zone 2 to develop that aerobic capacity. And as we get closer, I guess, in increasing the mileage and get closer to race day, they were saying to stay more on the zone 3 level. Um, as you were getting close. Do you have any opinions on that? Because honestly, sometimes I get more confused about with that information.
Yeah, no, and I'm so glad you're bringing it up because I think this is confusing for a lot of people. So I would love to kind of shed some light and some
Yeah,
clarity
of course,
on a
please.
topic that's confusing, overall confusing. The way that I like to think about it, right, is that different types of running and different zones serve different purposes. So if you want to break it up into zones, you can think about zone 1 and 2 as being your easy effort running, your easy pace running, right? And then zones 4 and 5 are your harder intensity efforts. That's where you think of like your speed workouts, your intervals. Those are going to be kind of more 4 and 5. So kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. And then in the middle, we have zone 3. And zone 3 is sometimes referred to as the gray zone, which I kind of like thinking
Yeah,
about
yeah,
it
yeah.
like that, right? So a lot of runners will spend a lot of time running in this gray zone on days that should be their easy running days. So the problem with spending too much time in the gray zone, like we were talking about earlier, we want our easy runs to be recoverable. The purpose of running easy is to allow us to train at a higher volume. So spending too much time in the gray zone, and it's not a bad thing. Like the gray zone is not a bad thing, but spending too much time there, it's not, it's too challenging for you to get the benefits of an easy pace run, but it's not challenging enough or high intensity enough to get the benefits of a true speed workout. So I think that our time there should be intentional. So I do agree that as it gets closer to race day, that you'll spend more time in that middle kind of gray zone area because
Kind of
that's where
like
you can.
targeting the pace.
Exactly. So when
Okay.
you think of more like tempo runs kind of fall into that high end of that zone 3. So, there's a purpose behind tempo runs and they can be really helpful for, increasing your lactate threshold and all of these things that can help develop speed, develop power, develop these other things. So our time there should definitely be intentional and it makes sense to incorporate those kind of more longer duration, moderate intensity efforts as it gets closer to race day, right? Because that more closely mimics the effort that you'll be putting forth on race day. But that doesn't mean that it should replace those easy runs, right? So, no, regardless of where you are in your training cycle, the majority of your runs should be that zone 1, zone 2, truly easy effort running. But yes, it
And
makes sense to layer in some more zone 3 efforts as it gets closer to race day. Does that clear that up and
yeah,
make
yeah, yeah,
sense?
I love it. And I love having this conversation. Exactly. That's the point of having like these talks, with people, with experts like you. And I think that the important thing, what I always try to focus lately is to polarize the training. Like
Mhm.
it's either too easy that I feel like very comfortable like with that pace, managing the distance that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go with 10 miles. Not no problem. Like fine, like I feel comfortable with it. Like you don't get scared because sometimes like I start seeing those numbers go up 18 or the 20, you're like, oh gosh, like how am I gonna do it? You know, you
Yeah,
start getting like little bit even stressed about it, like
of
anxiety. I'm
course.
like, how am I gonna do that? You know, because you see like this such a big number that it can get a little bit scary to some of us when those numbers start appearing, right? So the importance of having a good solid um easy easy training, right? And polarizing the training so that way when it feels hard, it either feels hard or it feels like too uh, easy, right? To be
Yeah.
honest with you, lately I've been trying to follow more my heart rate to
Mhm.
guide more my um I know heart rate can be a little bit it's just sensitive. It's just
Yes.
sensitive to if you're dehydrated, if you're stressed,
Yeah.
if you're sweating too much, if it's too hot, if it's too cold, if you didn't eat well. It's so sensitive to whatever thing. But lately, I've been using it, I guess, just to really polarize my training, not to focus too much on the numbers, but at least like know that even if they go up, okay, I might be not having a good sleep, I might be a little bit dehydrated, but I know my effort is feeling kind of like on the lows versus having like that high impact training just to give me a little bit guidance without being too strict about it uh, because because of that. Um, but going back, I guess, to that gray zone, I feel, especially I guess when I was training, I guess back then, maybe a year ago, or and maybe this can happen to a lot of runners. You get stuck to a pace where it is so close to easy when you're doing your easy training and when you're doing your hard training, your tempos, they're so close to each other that you cannot even tell anymore if it's what am I doing because they're so close to each other. And
Yeah.
I feel that that's why you call the gray zone, right? Because you haven't been able to really polarize that training, like send them to the opposite side of what's an easy and recovery or when it's actually like a hard workout.
Yeah, exactly. And I love what you said about that, about it being polarized. And that's how I like to think about it. And that's how I like to talk to my athletes about it too, right? Like we have easy running on this end of the spectrum, and it serves a very specific purpose of building our aerobic base, building our efficiency with using oxygen, training in a way that's recoverable so we can build up that mileage and build up that volume. That's easy running. That's on all the way on this end. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have those harder, more intense efforts. And the gray zone kind of lies in the middle. But I think a good way to think about it too is like if you finish an easy run, it should almost feel too easy, right? Like you should finish that run feeling like, I could probably go a few more miles. Like, did I even work out today? Did I even run today? Like, I feel great. Um, and I think sometimes runners get caught up in that mindset of feeling like I need this to feel like a workout. Like I want to finish feeling like I put enough effort forth into it. But that's kind of, and that's where you start flirting with that gray zone a lot more, right? Of like,
Exactly.
okay,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm pushing the pace so that I can feel like I'm doing something. The purpose of easy running is to feel easy, truly easy, right? So you want to, if you finish feeling like, I don't feel like I did enough, then you're doing it right.
Yeah, correct. And I feel like we are can be a prey of the gray zone. Like you get
Yeah.
stuck in there and you can stay there for a long time.
Oh,
And then
absolutely.
you're gonna really have to slow down now for reals to really start noticing the difference. I think for me, I had to start like taking like a lot of breaks to
Mhm.
actually slow myself down and slowly again start kind of like jogging and build that pace a little bit back up into that zone too. But it takes time, Alyssa, to build that
Really
zone
does.
too, that jog that you feel like you're I want to say running, but you're like in the zone too. It takes mastering, I think.
Oh, it
It's
absolutely does.
challenging.
Yeah,
It's not as easy as it
I know
sounds.
it's called easy running, but it is not an easy thing to do at
It's
all.
not an
It is
easy thing to accomplish.
definitely, yeah, it is definitely a skill and takes practice and time to really tap into that and develop it. And it takes, which I think is hard sometimes, is taking your ego out of it completely, right?
Yeah,
Which is
that's
a
a
hard
for
thing to
exactly.
do, you know?
Exactly. That's a key point. Getting your ego on the side. Don't
Yeah,
worry about Strava. Don't care about what people
yeah,
are gonna say on Strava. Just go ahead and feel what you should be doing. All
yeah,
right. So we're talking so much about easy running. We know about easy running, and everything should consist of easy running, right? To develop that high capacity for runs. So, but a lot of people say, well, how am I gonna run fast if I'm running slow, right? Am I gonna run slow all the time? So how am I gonna target my target pace on race days? So how do we do that? Where does the magic appear? How do we transition? What's happening?
yeah. I love this question so much because I feel like I hear that a lot, right? Like if I'm doing all these miles super easy at this pace that's a lot slower than what I want to do my race at, how am I going to hit that pace on race day? It's a nerve-wracking thing for athletes to experience, right? And I think, the important thing to think about and to talk about is that the magic happens in the easy miles. It really does. And it kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier of that's how you become an efficient runner is by having a strong base of aerobic effort. So you absolutely can get faster by running slow, but it feels super counterintuitive,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. It doesn't make sense. Like what you're
Yeah,
telling me, I need to run slow and then to get faster.
yeah,
How does that work? Like, and then
yeah.
how am I expected to really target that race pace that I want to be able to do if you always making me run slow, right? So when do you incorporate other type of specific pace workouts during the training plan?
Yeah, no, and I love that question. And I just want to mention quickly that you can, even if you do your entire training cycle at only easy pace running, you can still run faster on race day. Because again, that easy running, even though it's a hard thing to wrap our heads around, that's really the bread and butter of your training, having that strong aerobic base. And then the speed work and the more race specific efforts are kind of like the just fine tuning things and almost like the cherry on top. But you can
Okay.
absolutely still run a race that's a lot faster than your easy effort pace with only training at easy paces. I think something else that's kind of important to mention too is that training happens in cycles for a reason, right? So everything that you're doing in training is with the effort of you peaking on race day, of you being able to showcase that fitness when it matters most, right?
Yeah,
So that's
completely.
why we taper. That's why, on race day, you're running on fresh legs. You might carb load. Like there's all of these things that a good training program is designed to do to help set you up for success on race day, which can help, like during your training cycle, a lot of times you're training on tired legs and you have this cumulative fatigue from months and months of training. All of that isn't aren't factors that you have to worry about on race day. So I think those are good things to kind of think about too. But as far as introducing more speed work, the way that I like to think about speed work is that the closer it gets to race day, the more race specific your speed workouts should be.
And how
So,
close are we talking about?
so again, it kind of depends on the person and their goals. But I would say the last like 8 weeks, 8 to 12
Okay.
weeks of training are more kind of geared towards more race specific efforts. And starting farther than that, you can start with kind of more just general speed work. Kind of just sprinkling it into the mix, because if at that point you've been only doing more easy efforts, kind of starting small, sprinkling it into the mix, and then gradually building it in from there.
Okay. And obviously it makes sense. So for example, for somebody who's starting to run and training for their marathon,
Yeah.
so if their plan is consistently only of easy running for their whole 20 weeks, that should give me enough aerobic capacity to sustain the race for that day, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're talking about building that plan as well, right? As part of this plan. Many people run 120 miler. Some people do not run 20 miles. Other people run, I don't know, 2 to 3 20 miles. How high up should we go as part of our training plan?
Yeah. And that is a great question. And I hate to keep saying it depends, but it
I
really
know,
truly
it
does depend.
depends.
And that's, it very much so depends on the athlete. I personally like, for most of my athletes, I will say, that are doing a marathon build, will incorporate, and I usually like to do more than one 20 miler in their
Okay.
build. And the reason why I think that it's an important piece of training is, the mental side of it is huge, right? So just like if an athlete feels confident tackling 20 miles, something about breaking that, breaking into the 20s just makes that distance feel more manageable. So I think there's a lot of, um, mental benefits of doing that 20 miler. And I like having more than one, because a lot of times athletes will put a lot of pressure on this 20 miler, right? Because it's the longest, or any, whatever the longest run of the training cycle is. I think it makes sense to have a couple times at that effort in case one doesn't go to plan. So that
Okay.
way you have a chance to kind of redo it and have more confidence at that effort. But with that being said, you absolutely do not need to run 20 miles to be able to successfully cover a marathon distance. And this is where pace and speed, how fast of a runner somebody is, kind of comes into play. There's some effort, or there's some research showing that long runs after 3 hours, they kind of start losing, like the gains start diminishing. And then after a certain point, then the risks start going up. So these longer runs, no matter what distance, whether it's 16 or 18 or 20, they need to be thoughtfully planned out and incorporated into a training cycle, so that an athlete can go into them confidently and without worrying about jumping up too much. But 16, again, depending on somebody's pace, you don't want somebody going out and doing spending 5 hours doing their long run, because that's just not beneficial. It's not serving any purpose. It's not gaining anything. So for someone whose easy pace is on the slower end, then maybe 16 or 18 miles makes more sense. I think something else that's good to think about here too is that, when you're training for a longer distance race, of course, long runs are important, right? But they aren't the most important thing, and they aren't the only thing. So weekly volume and weekly mileage is really important also. So I worked with an athlete recently who was going into a marathon build, and we were chatting, and she told me straight away, this was our first race build working together, but she told me, I've trained for marathons in the past, and I know I hate doing 20 milers. Like, she just had something against running 20
Okay,
miles.
she's like, don't give
Okay,
me 20 milers. Okay.
yeah, then we won't do 20 miles. So there's plenty of other ways to, get those same adaptations and get an athlete prepared for covering that distance without covering 20 miles. And I think a good way to do that is kind of sandwiching long runs together. So let's say if someone's longest long run is 16 miles. So they'll do 16 miles on Saturday or whatever their long run day is, and then do like a medium long run the day afterwards. So they're running on tired legs, and then, so 16 miles, and then the next day they do like 5 or 6 miles or whatever. So they're still getting that kind of like cumulative fatigue and that experience of training on tired legs, even without getting into those higher mileage long runs.
So, like the weekly mileage then has more weight than actually, let's just say, a long run per se.
I think they both
Both?
are important. Yeah. I think, long runs are important. I think part of the reason why long runs are so important is really the mental side of things too. Like, yes, you want to know that your body can physically, you can spend that much time on your feet. But also, like if you're out there running for 3 miles at a time, it gets boring after a while, right? So,
Yeah, definitely.
and it's hard. Like that's a hard thing to do, no matter how experienced of a runner that you are. So I think just building up that mental resilience, that's a main uh, point of doing long runs as well. But that weekly mileage is definitely a super important piece of the puzzle for feeling confident going into these longer distance races as well.
And I'm so glad you brought that 3 hour like curfew, I guess. I have heard about it like
Yeah.
recently, and they were saying 3 hours, 3 hours and a half, like a long run shouldn't be that long. So it made me wonder about those of us who are on the slow side, that maybe a 20 miler can take up to 4 hours. So if I'm out there doing my long run and I just hit 3.5 hours and I still have like maybe 4 miles to go, 3 miles to go, should I just should I continue, or I know it's gonna be, I guess it depends, right? And on the training plan and all of that, right? It's so everything is so individualized and it depends on the athlete as well. But yeah, I have heard recently about that 3 hours, no more than 3.5. It shouldn't really bring it doesn't bring that many benefits to do more than, I guess, 4 hours doing out there. It can be more harmful sometimes to do such a long, I guess, long run.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, it is a very individualized thing. It's hard to really say for sure without knowing more about somebody's specific training plan, whether that's the best call for them or not. So I think that's really like an individualized decision for sure.
And I think the importance also like of the long runs is because it brings us the opportunity to practice fuel, to practice
Yeah.
hydration, to practice anti-chafing, to
Yes.
practice
So important.
right, to practice. I don't know if you have any GI issues or other gels. Like there's so many things that can go wrong. Like, to be honest, on a long run. So all of these are like brings us opportunities to practice each one of them, and also your mental, to have that focus, because we know that running is like, especially on long distance, is more like a mental challenge as well than a physical, the endurance of it, right? But it's that mental toughness and that mental state that you gotta be able to develop to as part of your physical training process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about treating long runs as kind of ways to practice these other things that are such important pieces of the puzzle too, right? Like I think fueling is huge. It's one of those things that it takes some trial and error to figure out what works best for you. Everybody's a little bit different with that, and which gels you like and which
I
gels you don't
know.
like, and will this one hurt my stomach, or and this one feels great. It definitely does take that trial and error. So I think fueling is definitely something to start practicing early in the training cycle. As soon as those long runs start building, to play around with your fueling and find what works for you, and have a few different options of different types of fuel. So that you don't get sick of your favorite gel by the end of your training cycle
I know.
and all of that too. But yeah, just and getting comfortable with your gear, your shoes, your shorts, your making sure that you're covering all the areas that are prone to chafing. I think all of that stuff, um, like that's a big part of what the training cycle is about too, is just finding these areas and troubleshooting them so that you don't have to worry about any of those things on race day.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, I know we've talked about like the idea is of the good training plan, right? So we talked about the easy runnings, have the long runs. Um, How about the weekly? I know we talk about the weekly mileage and you brought it up, right? I know it depends as well on the athlete, right? Um, some people go up to like 40 miles, 50 miles, 70 miles. I guess the more experience that you have, obviously, and how many marathons have you run in the past, all of that. But if I'm a new runner, right? An athlete. I'm just beginning. It's my first event. I don't have experience at all. Um, how high the weekly mileage, like on average, will should I expect to be doing per week to to be able to finish my marathon feeling like prepared for it?
Yeah, no, great question. Yeah, and it definitely depends. And I think this is something that is especially kind of individualized because some people thrive at higher volume running and some people don't, regardless of the level of running, level of experience that they have. So even if you look at like pro runners, some of them will be running like 100 plus miles per week and some of them will be running 80. Like there's a big variety even at the elite level, so it's normal for there to be um, a lot of variety at the more recreational level as well. So I think this is something too
I'm
that
sorry.
no, it's okay.
My dog suddenly just started to get into the conversation.
Yeah, he wants to be part of the conversation too. It's all
I'm so
right.
sorry.
But I think that that weekly mileage is another area that there can be a lot of comparison where you're like, okay, I'm running and I know this other person that's running and we have similar goals, but I'm hitting X amount of miles per week and they're hitting more than me. So there's definitely it's another area that can draw some comparison, but I like there's no point in comparing that because it's such an individualized thing. So I would say kind of like broadly speaking, just so I can give some kind of input on that for somebody who's beginning, who's training for their very first marathon, a good weekly mileage to begin at before you even start that marathon, like marathon specific training block, is to be at 20 to 25 miles per week
Okay.
and comfortable running consistently at least 3 or 4 times a week. So I think that's a good starting place
Okay.
for most people. And then you can expect to build up to the high 30s, low 40s kind of in your peak weeks of training from there.
Okay, sounds good. And yes, I want to be able to have like a kind of like a base, kind of like numbers, so people can have like an idea of what kind
Yeah.
of like to expect. Um, and I'm talking about those that are barely beginning, right? So it's gonna be their first event, and the idea is just to finish making it feeling, feeling good, and
Mhm.
be able to finish feeling strong, by the end of their marathon. Okay, so I like those numbers. All right, so in the 30s, high 40s, maybe that will be kind of like ideal just to get started, right? Finish
Yeah,
with those numbers.
absolutely.
All
And
right.
that's what training will build up to. So I think starting around that, I would say at least 20 miles per week. So for someone who's not at that point yet, spend that base building period building up to that 20 to 25 miles a week before starting a marathon specific training block. And then in the higher weeks of training, as we're getting closer to those peak weeks, it'll build up into those high 30s, low 40s, probably somewhere in that range.
Okay, sounds good. And make sure to that also include like those recovery days, like in between your runs as well, right?
Absolutely.
Um, Okay, so as I'm bringing up my weekly mileage, right? We know
Mhm.
that sometimes you're gonna have some pains and aches here and there as a physical therapist, right? When is it advisable to go and request help from a physical therapy? And I know here is where strength training plays like an important role to help you to keep you healthy and to keep you strong throughout this training process. But when is it advisable to pay a visit a PT when something you should be checking yourself at?
Yeah, great question. And this is something that is you know, it's hard because when you're training for a marathon or training for any distance event, you're asking your body to do something really hard, right? So sometimes little aches and pains can kind of pop up just as part of the normal part of the training process. So you don't necessarily need to seek guidance and seek help anytime any little niggle pops up. So I do think it is super helpful to have kind of guidelines around like, okay, is this something that I need to pay more attention to? Or is this okay for me to keep training through? So that's something that I'll talk to my athletes a lot about, is just having kind of clear guidelines around that. So some good kind of rules of thumb when it comes to that is that if the pain or the discomfort that you're feeling stays mild and stays tolerable, then that that's probably okay to keep pushing through. So if it's, okay, it feels a little bit off, especially if it kind of warms up as you go, if it seems to improve as you keep going, if it doesn't seem to stick around or linger after your run is over, those are all good signs that you can probably keep training, but you might want to kind of dial things back or modify a little bit. Like, okay, maybe I'll skip my speed workout this week or whatever that looks like, for just keeping a close eye on things and making things don't progress worse. If it's the sort of thing where you're continuing to have pain for a few runs in a row, or if it's pain that's getting worse as you go. So, okay, it started out, I'm just feeling it a little bit. As I keep running, it's getting worse and worse. Or if it's starting to affect your gait, where you feel like you're starting to limp, if you're having lingering pain after your runs, where you're kind of feeling it just walking around, those are all indicators that you should go and seek help from a professional.
And this is where I think it's so important to have a coach. For me, I'm always like, go get yourself a coach, because it's very important to, um, you can see yourself, and of course, you can download a plan, you can train yourself and just continue to build that mileage, right? And keep it easy. But this is where those adaptations and adjustments to your training plan according to you are going to be modified so you can continue without getting injured, like, and help you progress and make it to the race day. But for me, having a coach it's so important, because obviously it's going to adjust that plan, and it's going to be following up according to how you're responding to that plan, because we're all different.
Oh,
Definitely.
no, absolutely. And I totally agree with you that having a coach in your corner, coaches are great for a lot of different reasons, but I think especially like our work as a coach really shines through when things aren't going to plan, right? If something falls off track, helping an athlete kind of adapt and adjust in a way that makes sense for them is, I think, where coaches really can play an important role. I think also just we, like, as people, we're not that great at being objective around about ourselves, and we tend to be really, really, really hard on ourselves, right? So if something goes wrong, we have this tendency to kind of spiral about it and like beat ourselves up over it. So having a coach or in your corner is great for that reason too, just to kind of provide reassurance and support when
Yeah,
when we're
definitely.
being ridiculously hard on ourselves for no reason, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, no, no. I agree. I think it's important, very important to to have a coach. It gives you that guidance, that reassurance, adjustment, also like a little push sometimes here and
Yeah.
there. So I think it's great. If you can, please go ahead and get coaching to help you have like a better outcome on your races, right? All right, Alyssa, any other tips or guidance that you think is important that should be considered as part of your training plan? That is, make sure to have this in your guide.
Yeah. So, something that I wanted to touch on a little bit more, we kind of briefly talked about strength training. So, I just wanted to dive into that a little bit more, because I feel like this is another area that can be kind of confusing for a lot of runners. So, just to provide some clarity for that, something that I see or hear a lot of runners that kind of run into is they'll wait until things start breaking down or not feeling good to be like, oh, maybe I should start strength training, right? But it's not always the best time to introduce strength training. So if you are in the peak weeks of your training cycle leading up to a race, your body's already fatigued, you're going through all these adaptations. It's not a good time to add in a whole new stimulus. And I think that's a lot of times what runners will end up doing. They'll be like, oh, I'm starting to feel a little achy here. I'm starting to feel a little this. I'm starting to feel a little that. Let me try strength training. And then it's just adding one more thing on top of an already full training plate. So I think I love strength training. I think it's super beneficial in a lot of ways, but the timing of strength training is important too. So I think a great time to focus on incorporating strength and really focusing on strength is during that base building phase. So before you get too much into your race specific training, really focusing on building up a solid base of strength then too, right? Because also when you get more into the throes of your strength of your race training, sometimes it gets hard to fit everything in, right? So sometimes things slide off the plate. So if you already have a solid foundation of strength built, it's okay to kind of let it slide or decrease the frequency or whatever you need to do to to focus on the other aspects of your training.
I know, and what you're saying like so important because we think strength training, when we're having these pains and oh no, I don't want to develop an injury. Let me go to strength training. But actually, strength training is equally important as your foundation. Like, even we like it or not, I'm not a fan of it, but of course, I have to do it. I'm so sorry.
I'm used to it. It's okay.
I have to. I have to do it. It's part of my routine, right? At least 2 to 3 times per week. That's what I try to do. Two of leg and one of upper body, and that's it.
That's perfect.
Don't ask for more. But my arm's like, hey, when is our turn? I'm like, that's it. You get 1 day. That's it. Be happy that you get something. but yeah, I mean, it's equally important because we make such a big demand of our muscles to support these long training weeks of running, and all of those if we don't really protect our muscles and our joints, right? With strength, of course, all that pressure and all that high impact is gonna rely on our joints, and that's when we start like having like hip pain and knee pain and ankle pain because we're not really working and providing that extra support to our muscles, and that's why it's so important. And sadly, it's gonna be part of it. We want to continue running. We're gonna have to do strength training. I'm so sorry, Alyssa.
No, it's so funny that you say that. I love that you're saying that because I feel like a lot of runners feel the same way. So they're like, oh, I'm just doing this because I know that I should, but I don't really like it. And that's something else that I like to talk about with strength training too, and kind of like building off of what you were saying is, it doesn't have to be this huge time commitment or this huge extra thing that you're adding into the mix to incorporate strength training. So just doing it a couple times a week, twice a week, I think is great. 3 times a week, you're doing bonus, so you get bonus points for that.
So I get an A+.
Yes, you get extra credit.
Okay.
But I think twice a week is twice a week is enough to still get the strength gains that you're looking for, without it being too much of a time commitment and without it getting in the way of your other training. So I think twice a week, and it doesn't have to be, like spending 20 or 30 minutes. That's enough time to do what you need to do and hit the areas that you want to strengthen to support your running. So For anybody else who doesn't love strength training,
Okay, yeah, at least
there's a way.
20, 30 minutes of a couple of squats here and there and a couple of
Exactly.
exercises. They're gonna
Right.
support you and protect you and help you out, right? And even help you become a little bit faster if you
Exactly.
really put into it the effort. Um, I guess another question about strength, it will
Yeah.
be I know that that's what I've learned, and that's why I even promote on my social media. So maybe right now you're gonna tell me I'm wrong, or maybe no, move it. Let's clarify what you're posting about it. I've learned that strength training comes after running, right? On your hard days. Yes,
So,
or when do we do as runners, if
yeah.
running is our priority, when do we incorporate our strength working routine?
Yes. And again, it depends. But
Damn it.
I get so sick of hearing me say that, but it's so
It,
true.
it is.
And again, it really kind of depends on what your main focus is, right? So on if you're in more of a base building phase, or in a phase where
Okay.
you're really focusing on building strength, where strength is your priority, I would say this also applies to if you're building back from an injury.
Okay.
Strength is a main priority in your training. Then you want to do whatever the priority is, that's what you want to do first. In a phase where you're training for a race, running is, of course, the main priority. So then it makes sense to do running first and strength training afterwards. But again, this isn't there's no hard and fast rules around
Okay.
it. When it comes to fitting in strength training, it doesn't have
Just
to
do
be
it,
optimal.
please.
Just fit it in whatever works best for you. So if
Okay.
you have the space to kind of, optimize things a little bit, that's a good way to think about it. But yeah, I think, sometimes it's hard to train in the optimal way, and life and schedules make it hard to really do that. So if that's the case, just do it however works best for you.
Okay, just get it done, please. Just
Just
fit it in somewhere.
yeah.
That should be good. All right, that is good to know. Any other things, Alyssa, that we didn't talk about that you think we should mention or don't forget about it? I know I could just keep talking about this on and make it like a 5 hour show. I don't think anybody's gonna listen to us, but I can just keep
I
talking
know there's
about it, right?
so much
But
so much to talk about and so
it's
many
so
different
much
directions we could go.
information, and
Yes,
I hear it here and there, and like, and I'm a person who love listening to podcasts, and
me
I love
too.
listening to conversations of other people because I learn, and then or I get confused, and then I'm like, but I've heard this, and no, this is. I've heard something different, so
Yeah,
it makes me think, and I don't know, maybe because we feel so passionate about this topic and talking about it, so it is to these conversations that I think we we continue learning and of course try to help others and not confuse them.
absolutely.
Bringing
Yeah.
information to others.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. Sometimes it can feel like there's information overload, right? Like I'm with you. I love listening to podcasts about running. I love reading about running. I'm just a pure running nerd. Like anything running
Yeah,
related,
yeah, same.
I want to
Yeah.
eat it up. But sometimes there's so much information out there that it can be really confusing. So I think, having these conversations and trying to talk about these confusing topics in a way that's as clear and understandable as possible can be really helpful for a lot of runners and a lot of listeners.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alyssa. So, do you work with adults, with long distance events, 5Ks, 10Ks? What's your area where you usually take more clients?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll work with runners of any level, of any
Okay.
I do mostly work with adults. But distance wise, I mostly work with half marathoners and marathoners, but I work with runners that cover shorter distances as well. But my my true passion and my area the athletes that I love to work with are athletes that are building back from an injury, or
Okay.
athletes that just have a lot of questions about training and the right way to do it. Because I really like, like the conversations we're having today, being that resource and helping people understand the why behind the things that they're doing in training. Because I think having that understanding and understanding the why behind certain things really helps build that confidence so that athletes can feel like they can trust their plan and know that what they're doing is the best thing for them.
And you bring the key point, trust. Is very important to trust the person that you're going to be working with. It's like
Yeah.
such an important key element, because obviously if you trust that person, you're pretty much going to go up and pay attention to, yeah, indications and what we need to follow,
Yeah.
instructions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when it comes to coach and athlete, it's just like any other relationship, right? Like the main cornerstones of things that lead to a successful relationship are the same. And so trust and communication have to be at the cornerstones of that relationship for it to be a positive experience on both sides.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alyssa. Any other things? Where can we look up for you? Or if anybody, are you taking any athletes? Where can reach out to you? More information of if anybody wants to get coached by you?
Yeah, and just thank you again so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really think it'll be helpful for a lot of people that listen. I am currently taking new athletes, and the best way to reach me is on Instagram at alyssaford.dpt.
Awesome. All right. Well, there you go, guys. If you want to get coaching, plus I know you provide also like a series of strength routines and everything to your athletes. You're a very well-rounded, physical therapist, running coach. You're an amazing human being. I love your philosophy that you post out there. And obviously, I'm sure your athletes have like a good connection with you. I have no doubt about that. So, thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, please reach out to me, and I'm gonna put the information for you guys to reach out to Alyssa if you wanna have like more questions. And make sure to follow her on Instagram. I'm gonna be posting all her links so you guys can go ahead and reach out to her. Thank you, Alyssa, again for being with me and having this amazing conversation. Love having you with me today.
Thank you again so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Have a good day. Take care. Keep running.